She did not look like a conqueror. That is the detail that should unsettle you most. When Rhaenyra Targaryen finally took the throne her father gave her, the one she had been promised, fought for, buried 2 sons for, she did not look like a woman claiming her destiny. She looked like a woman who had just discovered something about herself that she could not take back. So let us ask the question nobody wants to ask out loud. When the Queen finally sat the Iron Throne, what exactly was she thinking? And should we be afraid of the answer? Welcome to Bloodlines and Kingdoms. From House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones to every corner of George R.R. Martin's world, we break down the history, the lore, and the legendary bloodlines that define Westeros. If that sounds like your kind of adventure, subscribe and join us as we explore it together. To understand what happened inside that throne room, you first have to understand that King's Landing did not fall to an army. It fell to a betrayal, one so quiet, so internal, that most of the city never even felt the ground shift beneath it. Alicent Hightower made a choice. Not a desperate one, not a sudden one, a choice that had clearly been building for longer than anyone around her realized. In a secret meeting with the woman she had once called her dearest friend, and later her bitterest enemy, Alicent agreed to help Rhaenyra take the city, even if it cost her own son, Aegon, his head. Sit with that for a moment. A mother, agreeing to a deal that might end with her son's execution. What does it take to arrive at that decision? Guilt, certainly. The slow, corrosive weight of knowing the war she helped ignite has now killed children on both sides. Exhaustion, almost certainly. The particular exhaustion of a woman who has spent years propping up a crown she never wanted her son to wear. But there is a third possibility, the one the show lets you sit with, rather than confirms, that Alicent no longer believes in the cause she once nearly destroyed a kingdom for. She moved like someone settling a debt. She bribed the gold cloaks. She stood down the archers and the trebuchet men on the walls. The very men who were supposed to defend the city she had spent 2 seasons trying to protect. And in the process of dismantling her son's defenses from the inside, she was very nearly assaulted by Lord Jasper Wilde, the Master of Laws. A man who had made his contempt for women in power known long before this moment. He confronted her. He correctly suspected her treachery. And rather than sound the alarm, he chose violence. It is only by chance, only because the castle was full of people, because someone heard her cries, that Maester Orwyle arrived and put a stop to it. Orwyle, notably, did not stop Alicent's plan. He simply stopped the assault. Whatever he suspected about what she was doing, he let it happen anyway. That detail matters more than it first appears, because it tells you something about where the loyalty inside these walls had already gone. Quietly, almost without anyone declaring it, the city had already begun to turn. So when Rhaenyra and Daemon arrived at the gates, the guards surrendered without a fight. This is the part of the story that should feel uncomfortable, and if it doesn't, you are not paying close enough attention. There was no triumphant battle. There was no moment of overwhelming military might. The outer city simply opened. It was inside the Red Keep, where dragons cannot reach, where fire and scale mean nothing, that the real resistance waited. Knights, men-at-arms, people with swords who still believed, or claimed to believe, in the crown sitting unoccupied on Aegon's throne. Rhaenyra and Daemon fought their way through, and then the gold cloaks arrived. For one suspended moment, it must have looked like a trap closing. Surrounded, outnumbered. The kind of moment where conquest turns to slaughter. But it wasn't a trap. It was the debt Alicent had already paid coming due. The gold cloaks turned. The Red Keep fell. Not in fire, not in blood, but in the quiet mechanics of a betrayal set in motion hours before anyone in that throne room understood what was happening to them. Rhaenyra had her city. But here is where the story stops being about conquest and becomes about something far more uncomfortable, because a queen who takes a throne needs someone to answer for the cost of taking it. And Aegon, the man whose crown this technically was nowhere to be found. He had already fled the city with Larys Strong, surviving a triarchy ambush, killing a man himself with a broken arrow, demanding against all advice that they ride for Rook's Rest. The throne Rhaenyra had just bled for was, in that exact moment, sitting empty of the person she had come to dethrone. So Daemon went looking for a different kind of justice. He went to kill Maester Orwyle, the man who had let Alicent's betrayal unfold without raising the alarm, the man now sitting in the wreckage of a fallen regime. But Orwyle, with the instincts of someone who has survived court politics far longer than he has any right to, redirected him, sent him toward Lord Wilde instead, the man who had assaulted Alicent. Punishment for one crime, substituted for another, and then came something else. Something Daemon was not expecting. A gift from Larys Strong, the jailer said. If you watched the final moments of Season 2, you already know what that gift was. Otto Hightower, grandfather to the king, architect of the entire succession crisis that started this war in the first place. Alive, imprisoned beneath the very castle his own daughter and grandson had lived in total ignorance that he had been there the whole time. Think about the cruelty embedded in that detail. Alicent did not know her father was rotting beneath her feet. Aegon did not know his grandfather was alive in the dungeons of his own castle. Larys Strong, endlessly manipulative, endlessly 2 steps ahead of everyone in this story, had been sitting on that secret like a blade he was simply waiting to use. Daemon brought Otto up into the light and up into the throne room, where Rhaenyra was receiving the allegiance of lords and ladies who, hours earlier, had sworn fealty to someone else entirely. There was no Aegon to execute, no king to make an example of. But there was Otto, the man who had spent decades as hand to 2 kings, who had orchestrated the very coup that put Alicent's bloodline on the throne instead of Rhaenyra's. If anyone deserved to answer for this war in front of the city, by the show's own internal logic, it was him. And here, the story slows down. Here is where you need to pay attention to every detail, because this is the moment the entire episode has been building toward. Otto, old, beaten, aware of exactly what is about to happen to him, does something almost gentle. He asks Daemon to do it. Not Rhaenyra. He has known her since she was a child. He was, in his own complicated and self-serving way, present for nearly all of her life. Perhaps he could not bear the thought of her hand being the one that ended his. Daemon refused him that mercy. The people need to see her do it. Listen to what that sentence actually is. It is not justice. It is theatre. Daemon is not asking Rhaenyra to execute Otto Hightower because the law demands it, or because she alone has the right. He is asking her to do it because a kingdom watching its new queen needs to see her capable of violence. He is handing her dark sister, the Valyrian steel blade that has passed through generations of Targaryen hands, not as a symbol of justice, but as a tool to manufacture her legitimacy in front of a room full of people who, until that morning, had been loyal to someone else. This is not a small thing Daemon is doing to her. This is a husband, an uncle, a consort, whatever you want to call what Daemon is to Rhaenyra, placing the full weight of becoming a killer onto a grieving mother who has buried 2 sons in the span of this single season, and calling it necessity. And Rhaenyra takes the sword. She is sobbing. Let that detail sit with you, because it matters enormously to how we should read what happens next. This is not the cold, controlled execution of a queen settling accounts. This is a woman in visible, audible distress, holding a blade she did not ask for, about to do something she has never done. The first swing is wild, clumsy. It does not kill him. It wounds him, a vicious blow to the back that draws a groan from a man already broken by years of imprisonment. She has to swing again. The second strike is the one that finally finishes it. Otto Hightower's head falls to the floor of the throne room that his own scheming helped put a Targaryen on in the first place. There is a reason this should remind you of something far older than this story. In 1541, an elderly Englishwoman named Margaret Pole, one of the last surviving Plantagenets, a perceived threat to a Tudor king who had no real cause to fear an old woman, was executed in the Tower of London by an inexperienced assistant after the trained headsman failed to appear. By multiple accounts, it took nearly a dozen strikes to finish what should have been a single clean motion. Witnesses called it a butchery, a blundering, terrified young man hacking at a woman who would not stay still. Rhaenyra's execution of Otto Hightower is not that extreme, but it carries the same essential horror. The gap between what an execution is supposed to look like, clean and ceremonial and final, and what it actually looks like when an unpracticed hand is the one holding the blade. She climbs the Iron Throne afterward, unsteady, shaken. And then Alicent and Helena walk in. They find Otto's body on the floor of the throne room, headless. And here, right here, is the single most important moment in the entire episode. The one worth replaying frame by frame if you have the chance. Watch Rhaenyra's face. Alicent is shocked. That much is plain. But Rhaenyra's expression moves through something that should make you deeply uncomfortable to witness. First, something like horror. Then something like mortification. The look of a person realizing what they have just done in front of witnesses. Then sorrow, real and unguarded for the briefest instant. And then it hardens. The turmoil simply closes. Like a door. What replaces it is not relief, not triumph, not anything you could call victory. It is something colder, something that looks, disturbingly, like control. Like a woman deciding, in real time, in front of the people she now rules, that she cannot afford to be the person who was sobbing 30 seconds ago. So what was actually happening inside her head in that moment? Here is the uncomfortable possibility the show refuses to resolve for you. Rhaenyra did not simply execute a political enemy. She performed her first act of rule, and the performance was botched and witnessed, and now permanently part of how this city will remember her ascension. A queen who fumbles the symbolic violence of conquest in front of the very court she needs to convince of her legitimacy. That is not a small humiliation to carry into a reign, and there is a darker reading still, that somewhere in the space between the first wild swing and the second, finishing strike, something in Rhaenyra actually changed, not transformed into a monster, nothing so simple, but shifted, permanently, in the particular way that the first time you do something irreversible always shifts you. Grief had already cracked her open this season. We watched her rave over Jacaerys's body, clutching at a son who could no longer answer her. Daemon used that grief, deliberately, invoking old Valyrian prophecy about dragons and a chosen queen to push her toward exactly this moment. He did not give her time to grieve cleanly. He gave her a sword instead. Was this Rhaenyra discovering she was capable of violence she didn't know she had in her? Or was this Rhaenyra being shaped, deliberately, by the men around her into the kind of ruler this war demanded, whether she wanted to become that ruler or not? The show does not answer that question for you. It simply shows you her face, hardening, and lets you decide what you saw happen behind her eyes. What we do know is this. The throne she now sits on was not won through strength. It was handed to her through Alicent's betrayal, secured through a city's quiet capitulation, and consecrated, if that is even the word for it, through a botched execution performed by a grieving mother holding a sword for the first time, urged on by a husband who needed the people to see her capable of blood. That is not the beginning of a triumphant reign. That is the beginning of a question the rest of this season will be forced to answer. What kind of queen did King's Landing actually get? The one who wept while she swung the blade, or the one whose face went still the instant she realized the city was watching? Perhaps both. Perhaps that is the most honest answer this story has to offer, that Rhaenyra Targaryen did not become a different person in that throne room. She simply stopped hiding the person grief and circumstance had already been making her into. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, but heavier still perhaps lies the hand that swings the sword that puts it there.